Hello, my name is Thamara Faustine and I'm going to present you a brief explanation about the history of English literature from the 18th century to 21st century and the next two other questions. So please stay with me until the end of the video and let's get to the topic. So the first, number one, what did you learn from this class? First is from the 18th century era. So it is occurred in the 1690s to 1780s. So there was created the intellectual revolution where science and technology showed a great development. So they focus on the intellectual and minds. It is also marked with the rationalism among the philosopher and literature that stimulated their critical thinking. The state system only depends on the major thoughts, and it also has been called as the Augustan age because the character of this period is so impressive. Dryden, with the spirit of the Augustan age, established the heroic couplet, which became the norm of the Augustan poetry. This period is represented by Jonathan Swift and Pope, also with the technical polish and intellectual polish exemplified in the works. This century is the time of the Enlightenment, the age of reason, when all branches of science were developed and resulted in a great technical progress. This period also known as the rise of novel era. Then the literature of this era was dominated by satirical tradition and political issues. The language style, which is simple, clear, and precise. The works tended to set aside the individuality, artificial, and formal impression. Satire was mostly used in this era to criticize the upper class. Most of the poetry written in the form of heroic couplet, which consists iambic pentameter, and the drama was not really shown a great development in this era, but there are also some playwrights who created satire and realism plays. And there were also the emergence of newspaper and literary magazines that were popular in this era. Some of the famous writers in this era are Jonathan Swift with his famous work Gulliver's Travel, a satire on British society, then Daniel Defoe with his famous works Robinson Crusoe and Moll Flanders, and Henry Fielding with his famous work Tom Jones. Then this is for the Romantic period. So this era began at the end of the 18th century when there is a reaction against the formal rules and emotional restraint of neoclassicism in literature. There is literary and economic revolution that happened in this era and was the era of change where there is some country transformed from agricultural to industrial. Romantic period was also marked by the French Revolution in the 1789, where many people fought for their justice, about their rights. Their dignities were destroyed and corrupted by the social institution and governments, and there were also some distinction of the upper class as the superior and the lower class as the inferior. In Romantic period, literature turned again to sentiments, tradition, and exotic settings. The author in Romantic period put their soul and life of the imagination in creating their works, and they were interested in supernatural world and irrational mystical. Generally, their works tended to critique the society, injustice, questioning, and also exploring. The works were full of the personal, emotional experiences and become the forms of rebellions of the citizen or romanticist or to the Enlightenment and political changes at the end of the 18th century. The poetry was used and being liked by many people because it represents about the rights and the freedom they fight for. And there were many non-fiction prose were produced like history, biographical, literary criticism, essay, and many more. The growth of non-fiction prose was also followed by the growth of magazine and newspapers. And the drama, for drama, it's not really successful in this era because many people didn't appreciate it as an art. There was also a new genre of novel that is the gothic novel. It's about the story told about the consisted about the spirits, horror, and supernatural things. And it was the reaction of the authors which were against the rule that was applied at the time. Some of the famous author in this area are William Blake with his famous work Poems, Songs of Innocence and Experience, Sir Walter Scott with his famous work Waverley Roy and Ivanhoe, and Mary Shelley with her famous work of Frankenstein. Next, the Victorian era. So the Victorian era occurred during the reign of Queen Victoria in the 1837 to 1901. This period was marked by many important social and historical changes that altered the nation in many ways. Just like the population nearly doubled, the British Empire expanded exponentially, and technological and industrial progress helped Britain become the most powerful country in the world. Women roles are now being spotted and recognized. The Victorian era can be divided into two periods that are the High Victorian literature and and also the Late Victorian literature. So the High Victorian literature have some characteristics that are the morality, as people were losing the free meaning of the literature. So that's why the popular form of this era were novel and prose. Then the revolt, which during this era, the human revolution theory was proved by Darwin, and there's a kind of conflict between religion and science. Then there were intellectual development. The first and also the first photograph were taken, and also the very first electric train was invented by German. Then Victorian engineers developed bigger, faster, and more powerful machines, and this has led to the massive increase in the number of factories. Then the novel became the most popular literary form. It is to entertain the rising middle class and to depict the contemporary life in the changing society. The characters were well rounded, and the protagonist usually belonged to the middle classes society who struggled to create a niche from himself for his life for himself in the industrial world. The stress was on the realism and an attempt to describe the daily struggles of ordinary men that the middle classes reader could associate with. Novels became the means where the domestic confinement of women was questioned and play important roles as a form become the medium of the concern, such as women's suffrage become an important point of debate. The poverty and other economic reasons challenged the traditional roles of women. The novel as a genre was initially seen as feminine literature, and the literary rate among women increased. So the literary from this era is from romanticism to realism, politics to passion, optimism to pessimism, and the novel could successfully deal with the changing mood of the society. And we came to the late Victorian era. So there's the improvement in technology offered a lot of opportunities for the people in England, but also represented a major upheaval in regards to how people lived their lives and interacted with the world. People were distancing themselves from the church. The Industrial Revolution led to the distance between the haves and the have-nots growing at a really high rate. The common themes in the late Victorian era are the critique of industrialization and the deterioration of the rural lifestyle, the conflicts between classes and women's rights, increasing the society morality by realism. So the realism aims to portray a realistic event happening to realistic people in a realistic way. The novel in the late Victorian reflected an inner struggle to conquer the flaws of human nature through the effort and virtue. And in the 1880s, a gap started to open between the popular fiction and the literary and or art novel. There is also a new subgenre in the 1860s called as the sensation novel. And for example, The Woman in White and The Moonstone are Wilkie Collins' famous sensational novels. However, Thomas Hardy is considered as the greatest novelist of this generation. He was influenced by both the romanticism of the earlier era and the social commentary of Dickens. His first published novel, Desperate Remedies, appeared in the 1871. His novels has a brilliant evocation of the landscape and people of his fiction novels is combined with the sophisticated sense of the age of modernism. Then the the Victorian theater became an extremely popular form of the entertainment for all social classes in this era. The plays usually had a strong comedic element, both high and low, and the plots were full of mistaken identities, coincidences, and mistimings. Oscar Wilde was the leading dramatist of the late Victorian period with his satiristic plays. And the Victorian literary comedy saw this age, which also so often remembered as for its gloomy rectitude because of the crisis of faith, the condition of England being questioned, and the age of modernism may in fact have been the greatest era of the comic writing in the English literature. And for the famous writer of these two eras are Charles Dickens with his work Oliver Twist, Great Expectation, then Charlotte Bronte with her work Jane Eyre, and Thomas Hardy with Desperate Remedies. Next, we come to the Edwardian era. So, this era began in the reign of King Edward the Seventh in 1901 to 1910 after the death of Queen Victoria. So the Edwardian era was marked by significant shift in politics as section of society that had been largely excluded from the power in the past, such as the common laborers, women, and the industrial working class. Women in this era were started to play more role in the politics. There is also a rising interest in socialism, attention to the plight of the poor and the status of women in society, including the issues of women suffrage, together with increased economic opportunities as a result of rapid industrialization. This era stands out as a time of peace and prosperity. The literature at this era reflected the restless ambivalence of the new millennium. Many writers of this period drawing widely upon the realistic and naturalistic convention of the 17th century, and it is also given a number of literary and poetic movements such as Imagism, Futurism, and Lost Generation, which are the Imagism describe a movement in America and British poetry beginning in the 1910 that borrowed from haiku and free verse, while the Futurism was born in Europe and advocated the abandonment of conventional syntax and the use of images drawn from the age of technology. Then the Lost Generation refers to expatriate American writers, including Ernest Hemingway and Francis Scott Fitzgerald, who came to whose works reflected a deep disillusionment with their society. In fiction, some of the best-known writers are G.M. Barrie with the Peter Pan, then Arnold Bennett, Chesterton, Joseph Conrad, Rudyard Kipling, and many more. Besides the fiction, the literary criticism and short story also achieved popularity. For example, Bradley, who was famous literary critic with Shakespearean tragedy, Then the Edwardian novels continue to have some of the best variation that no literature has ever seen before. Next, the modernism era. So the modern age has been marked by a significant development in the field of science, literature, art, technology, and many more. It is also known as the age of globalization and discovery, and the age of interrogation and anxiety, because the value coupled with the complexity of the modern life has resulted in frustration, anxiety. And this period was completely overshadowed by the two world wars. By definition, modernism is a style or movement in the arts that aims to break with the classical and traditional forms. People in this era started to consider the Victorian age as a hypocritical age, having superficial and mean ideals. They were growing interest in the poor and the working class. The works also influenced by economic and social changes. Marxism was the most powerful influence in this era. The new psychological researches also influenced the literature of the 20th century. The literary works were characterized by a self-conscious break with the traditional ways of writing, which meant it rejected the conventional style of prose and poetry. In modernist literature, the individual is more interesting than it's called as the individualism. Then because they were broke free from the old forms and techniques, such as the poets abandoned the traditional rhyme scheme and wrote in the pre-verse, and then the novelists divide all expectation which the writer makes image from the past with modern language and themes, creating a collage of styles. And this era was also characterized by experimental modernist works, as the inner working of consciousness were a common subject for the writer of this era. Then there is a narration called the stream of consciousness, where the point of view of the novel meanders in a pattern resembling human thought. The authors such as James Joyce, mm, then Virginia Woolf, along with the poets T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, are well known for their experimental and modernist works. Modernist authors also depicted this absurdity in their works. Then there was also symbolism, which was an innovation in this era because they left much more to the reader's imagination and than the earlier writers, leading to open-ended narrative with the multiple interpretation. For example, the James Joyce Ulysses. Then there is the formalism, as the writer as of the modernist period saw literature more as a craft than a flowering of creativity. The novels become the most popular work, and there are the psychological novel and new genre of novels such as the biographical novel, satirical novel, and many more. Then the modern novel depicted the doubts, uncertainties, frustration, and anxiety of the modern world. It was also pessimistic in tone. The modern English society used the imagism as the change in the subject matter, and the change in poetic technique was inevitable. In the prose, modernist writers aimed at achieving simplicity and clarity of expression and carefully avoids all literary artifices, impeding their flow of thought. The drama was developed, especially the theaters. Besides that, the modern essayists have imparted new dimension to the development of prose style. And some of the modernist writers are David Herbert Lawrence with Son and Lover, James Joyce Ulysses, T.S. Eliot with Murder in Cathedral, George Bernard Shaw with The Mrs. Warren Profession, William Butler with The Land of Heart's Desire, and Virginia Woolf and with The Mrs. Dalloway. Okay, we come to the 20th century era. The term postmodern has been largely used to describe the attitude and creative production which followed the Second World War. It celebrates diversity, eclecticism, and parody in all forms of art, from architecture to cinema, from music to literature. The literature was based on unscientific irrational thought process and it rejected logical thinking. The subject of literature is still about the human condition. Then there is no more heroes. It's about an individual with solitary and responsible for their own destiny. The identity is a common theme, such as the sexual identity, racial identity, and many more. The broadcast media dominated life, and also the Irish writers were especially important in this era, just like James Joyce and Samuel Beckett as the central figures of the modernist movement. Then the drama was dominated by well-made plays in the standard English for middle-class audiences. In the poetry, the Second World War, many poems were written in the protest against the established social order and the threat under the nuclear war. Auden's long poems of 1948, The Age of Anxiety, is often seen as giving a label to the second half of 20th century. The focus of the poetry is restricted, concentrating more on the particular of everyday life. The novel since 1945, following the Second World War, increased the number in novel publishing and in the variety of themes and subjects they cover. The romance, thriller, and historical novels are the bestseller in this era. In the 20th century also appeared the children's literature as many Victorian writers first wrote for readers. For example, Milne with the Winnie the Pooh and J.K. Rowling with the famous book Harry Potter. Besides that, one feature of the modern novel which takes on the great importance is the use of dialogue and conversation, especially when presented with a very little narrational intervention, which gives the reader challenge of filling out the script. There was also writing multi-novel sequence and the campus novel. The role of women as inferiors or outsiders in society has concerned many writers and is depicted in the Muriel Sparks' works in the campus novel. Then the internationalism emerged in the writing at the end of the 19th century when outsiders like Shaw and Conrad began to make their mark on the English literature. Then in the 1950s, Sam Salvan was the first writer of the West Indian origin to write novels and stories about immigrants to England. He practically invented the literary use of a new variety of English, London Caribbean English, in such novels as The Lonely Londoners, and there was also some contemporary Scottish and Irish novels as many important writers, such as Angela Carter, an English writer that had a great fondness for the intertextuality that passage and what range of allusion permit to bring the together magic realism, postmodernism, feminism, the gothic, the real, and the surreal. And the last era, but not least, the 21st century era. Please stick with me till the end. The defining event of the first part of the 21st century was the attack on the American Twin Tower in New York on 11 September 2001. The attack has a huge impact in every sense, emotionally, culturally, and politically all over the world. Besides that, the economic crash of 2008, wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, the war on terror, LGBT, and COVID-19 have all contributed to create the particular atmosphere of the years in the 21st century, which is now. Then these events become a reference point for artists and writers of all kinds. There are also many major writers are women, gay, born outside the Great Britain, or whatever else might distinguish and characterize them, just like Martin Amis, Sarah Waters, and Zadie Smith. Many writers such as Paul McDermott, Ian Rankin, and many others have expanded the range of crime novel to bring in the realm of psychology, social concern, and critical polemic. The poetry has flourished in the early 21st century, while the poetry often distance themselves from the quotidian, probing the eternal values, and often from the stimulus of actual present-day events. The drama since 2000, the playwright still using documentary and historical evidences. Drama has had something a golden age in this era. Sarah Kane is a very significant figure in the drama century, in the late 20th century British theatre. The David Edgar with The Shape of the Table, one of the most important plays of the 90s. And we come to the number 2. What was the lesson learned of this class? For me, the lesson learned of this class are knowing about the history itself, which are very important to know. The literature also participate in every era occurred, and this show about how important the literature role in this life. And in the 18th century, I learned about the braveness of the writers in this era by the use of satire and realism to criticize the upper class. That in Romantic period, I get the lesson about the works and the author rights, which represent about the nature and individualism, and express about the situation happen to the lower classes people. There is also the emergence of the female author, just like Jane Austen and Radcliffe, with some of their works that become successful in this period. For the Victorian period, I learned about the differences of the upper class and lower class. Just like the lower class being exploited and people began to give their voice through the literature, which again, it makes the literature take important part of the most of the era. And in Edwardian era, I learned that many famous literary works were in this era, just like Peter Pan, which I really like, despite the era was the shortest in the history. And then for the 20th century era, I learned that there were so many ideas or theories came in this era, which later make the literature to the next level. And the last is for the 21st century era, which is right now. For me, there are also so many ideas appear and of course still developing through time, because every day may have something new in this era, and some are unexpected as the literature and the world around us are changing and developing every day. Besides that, I can conclude that literature plays an important role in every era until now. Even until now, it's still developing and increasing every time. And it also can influence many aspects of our lives. Next, the number 3, please stay with me. What is the next plan after joining this class? Hopefully, the lesson that I got from this course will be useful in the future, and maybe I will learn about it deeper later and read many books about it. I learned that many things in this course actually become because of this course I understand why literature is so important in our lives, that there are so many ideas came up from the different era, and it makes me think that the word and literature must have developing every day. And of course, I learned to work under pressure and time, and trying to manage my time. In addition, I hope I can pass this semester and this course with a good grade. Hopefully, maybe an A for this course. Thank you for your attention. That's all for today. I'm sorry if I did many mistakes during the presentation. Thank you for your attention and have a good day.